Unfortunately, I am home sick with COVID and not allowed to go to work. So I'm trying to catch up on a few little jobs that I'm capable of currently. I'm really not that sick, it's just the voice that sounds really awful. So one of the important jobs I have been putting off for quite a while is to do the horses' fecal egg count. So today I have had the horses tied up for an hour or so. They've had a hay net and I've been waiting for them to poo. And thanks to Shallico, he's done one. So I'm going to take a sample. I have a pre-marked plastic Ziploc bag. Nice fresh poo. I'm going to take a sample from a few different spots of the poo. From the edge, from inside, from the other side. Just taking little bits at a time. Try not to get the dirt from underneath. So that's my sample bag for Shallico. Max hasn't come forth with the requirements just yet, so we're going to let him stand for a bit longer and see if he does. When he does, we'll take both samples upstairs and I'll do a video of how I prepare the manure and how I do the fecal egg count. We've collected our poo samples from the horses. That video was done a few weeks ago when I was sick with COVID and had a very croaky voice. It's now fast forward a few weeks and I'm not processing those particular poo samples. I've got some new ones and I'm just going to show you the step-by-step of what we do. So firstly, in here I've got a saturated salt solution which I've already previously made up. I'm going to suck some out with my big syringe and then here I've got a little set of scales and it's zeroed out and I'm going to add 40 mils of the salt solution. $40 mils, not 41. Precisely 40 mils there. And then I'm going to add 5 grams of horse manure. Looks like this person has just collected a couple of balls. So I'm just going to take a little bit from each part of the poo, some from the inside, some from the outside, mix it all up and just grab all these little bits and add it up to 45 grams total. Then we get a spoon, not the spoon that you use for your cuppers, and mix it thoroughly. I usually am preparing 2 samples at once here, so I usually let that sit. I'm going to give it another stir, make sure all those strands of grass are separated to give the eggs every opportunity to come out. So I'll show you. It's just a tea sieve. Then I'm squeezing it all out. I give it another mix while I draw some up in the pipette. And then I've got my master slide and put it at an angle and put it in like that. There's 2 chambers of the master slide, so I'll give it another mix while I draw more up. And I'll quickly try and do this so that the eggs won't settle. Right, so there I've got 2 chambers drawn up in the McMaster slide. Put it on the microscope carefully. Now they also say let it sit on the microscope for up to 2 minutes. I don't think that's absolutely necessary, because if I was to look in there right away I would see eggs immediately. You start at the top of one line so that you can see both of the edges of your grid. You scan down, then you move across to the next grid, and then you scan up, move across, scan down. That's so that you don't get mixed up with where you've counted. When you put it in the microscope, you'll see the little round black dots with a hollow centre. They're air bubbles. So if you make sure your air bubbles are in focus, your eggs will be in focus. I'm now scanning up and down each grid line. There's one there. The eggs are quite large underneath the microscope. They appear very easily, and they're not easily mixed up with anything else that you see. So you can actually scan down these grid lines quite quickly. Even if it is a little bit out of focus, you can still see the shape it pops out. If you do find an egg that's on one of your grid lines, if it's 50% within your grid, you count it. So you add up the total from each grid. So I've only got one from each grid, so that's just a total of 2. And then you get your total and you times it by 25. For this particular formula, there's lots of different formulas for the different slides and different amounts of solution that you use. So this fecal egg count for this horse is 50, which is a really, really low count. So less than 200 is considered a low worm burden, and it's not advisable to worm at that amount. Anywhere between 200 and 500, it's personal decision, personal choice whether you worm or not. That can depend on your environmental situation, how the horses are kept in the paddocks, what age horses are kept together, because the different ages, once the horse goes up in age, they become naturally resistant to worms. So if you keep all of your old horses in a paddock together and they've all got low worm counts, you may only just need to worm them once a year. And that's just for the worm eggs that don't show up in your worm counts, because they don't all show up. Only some of the particular worm eggs show up in these. So if you're constantly getting a 0 count or a very low count, it's still advisable probably to worm about once a year. It's probably really not necessary to worm more than once a year. And then over 500 is considered a high count, and you can get horses that what we call high shedders, and they usually have really high counts. I had a horse who was always counting over 12 to 1600 every single time I did her fecal egg count. I have got an old mare who's 25, who you've probably seen in my videos. She's always got a low count, anywhere between 50 and 150. I have even counted 0 in her. She wasn't wormed for quite a few years. Until recently I found, I think it was pinworms in her bottom, because the worms come out of the rectum and they lay their eggs on the outside. So, and pinworms will not show up in a fecal egg count, or very, very rarely show up in a fecal egg count. I probably still should have been worming her at least once a year to cover the things that you don't find, because you don't often find bots. Rarely see tapeworms. Horses up to 3 years old, they are very susceptible to worms. You should still do fecal egg counts on them to see at what levels they're running at, but they still need to have a good worming program. Make sure you change your ingredients and do the different ingredient wormers, not just the different brand name wormers. And just keep an eye on the young ones, because the worms can do a lot of damage. Now, as I said earlier, you really need to give your solution, your fecal solution, a really good mix before you put it in your slide, because what you're using is a flotation solution. So if you let this sit in this container or cup for a few minutes, the eggs are going to float to the surface, and you're not going to know because they're microscopic. So it's really important to give it a really thorough mix every time you suck some up into your pipette to put into your slide. And even when I'm sucking it up into the pipette, I'm keeping it moving the whole time, and I'm putting into the slide as fast as I can, because if you think about it, it sits in here, it's still going to float to the top. Well, I hope I've covered everything, and I hope you've learned something. If you've got any questions, drop me a line, comment below, send me a message. If you want some fecal egg counting done and you're in central Queensland, you're also welcome to send samples in the post. That's a normal thing to do, and they can last a few days in the post, and then they can last up to 7 days in the fridge. Fecal account's $15. I think the vets charge about $50, but I'm happy to do it just to help people out and help you on your worming journey, and to try and keep our properties and horses non-resistant to worming. See you later. So I know a lot of you are probably watching this video absolutely horrified that I was using coffee cups. Not to worry, they'll wash up well. Just if you ever come to visit and have a cup of tea, probably just if you see those cups, just refuse the cup of tea. Anyway, I'm just going to show you close up of the scales that I'm using. I'll tear this. 40 grams of flotation liquid in there. That's what we're looking at. I'm not going to try and adjust that. I'm just going to leave it at that amount. Otherwise it takes too long. So here's another set of scales. You can get these really cheap off of eBay. I think they're like jewelry scales or something. The pipettes that I used, they were off of eBay, 20 for a couple of bucks. This is the microscope. Has to be a 40 times microscope. The microscope was worth about $350. This is in Australia. The flotation solution was just made out of salt, saturated salt. So there are lots of formulas online on how to make your saturated salt solution. It's quite easy. Just use hot water, pour lots of salt in there until there's actually salt left in the bottom. You can kind of see there's salt left in the bottom there. Here is an up close of the McMaster slide. So you can see there are two chambers and there are green grid lines. They actually say the green grid lines are better to get than the blue ones. You can get Whitlock slides as well, and depending on which slide you buy is the formula that you need to use. They're reusable, obviously, as long as you flush them out straight away and don't let your fluids set in there and dry up, because then you'll never be able to clean them on the inside.